discussing The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway and reviewing the film. Hopefully we all saw it, and I would really like to discuss the recent documentary out on him, which is kind of a very major in terms of teaching us about him and affecting our perspective, I think, on him as a human being. I mean, also as a writer, too. I have to say, well, I'll get into that after I'm done. Anyway, The Old Man and the Sea, the book, came out in, I guess, 1952. It was written, it's a novella, and it was written about 10 years after Hemingway's last novel that he had written 10 years previously had gotten terrible, terrible reviews. So he didn't write for another 10 years, and here he is with The Old Man and the Sea. So The Old Man and the Sea is about a Cuban fisherman named Santiago who has not caught a fish in 84 days. He's heading out to sea to try and break his bad luck. His closest friend is a young boy who usually fishes with him, but the little boy's been told he cannot go fishing by his parents, so he doesn't join the old man or Santiago on the trip. The book follows Santiago as he goes out to sea in a skiff and ends up catching a fish, a very large fish, the largest fish he has ever caught in his life. It's a marlin, as we learn later. But the fish is not immediately defeated. With the bait and the hook still in him, he pulls the old man far and distant out to sea, where the man is very alone, solitary. There is a swelling sea all around him. It's just him and the fish. The old man, though, misses the boy very much. Eventually, he kills the fish when it starts circling the boat. The old man stabs him with a harpoon, but the blood that spills out of the injured fish starts to attract sharks. As the old man sails back to shore, Marlin is attacked by more sharks. He's able to kill one of the big mako sharks, but by the time he gets back to land, the sharks have ripped and eaten the entire marlin, leaving a skeleton hanging off the side of the skiff. When the old man returns, he struggles up to his cabin and he falls asleep. When he wakes up, the boy is there, and they make plans to go out fishing together. End story. Now, this is a quote from the book, a line from the book that I happen to love very much, and I think is worthy of breaking apart and analyzing as we discuss this. Fish, he said, I love you and respect you very much. I will kill you dead before the day ends. Now, I'm going to tap into one secondary source, which happens to be William Faulkner, but I'm going to say a couple of quotes from Hemingway himself about the story. He says in a number of places, whatever I learned is in the story, says Hemingway, but I hope it reads simply and straight, and all the things that are in it do not show, but only are with you after you have read it. Don't you think it is a strange damn story that should affect all of us, me especially, the way it does? I have had to read it now over 200 times, and every time it does something to me. It's as though I had gotten finally what I had been working for all my life. That last line, I think, is important. There isn't, he said, Hemingway said in another discussion with a critic, there isn't any symbolism, he wrote to critic Bernard Berenson. The sea is the sea. The old man is an old man. The sharks are all sharks, no better and no worse. All the symbolism that people say is shit. What goes beyond is what you see beyond when you know. Okay, and then this is a quote from William Faulkner. Faulkner and Hemingway were rivals, but respected each other. And he did a much longer review of The Old Man and the Sea, but I took up this paragraph. Okay, Faulkner said, well, it's his best. Time may show it to be the best single piece of any of us. I mean, his and my contemporaries. This time he discovered God, a creator. Until now, his men and women had made themselves, shaped themselves out of our own clay. Their victories and defeats were at the hands of each other, just to prove to themselves or one another how tough they could be. But this time, Hemingway wrote about pity, about something somewhere that made them all. The old man who had to catch the fish and then lose it. The fish that had to be caught and then lost. The sharks which had to rob the old man of his fish. Made them all and loved them all and pitied them all. It's all right. Praise God that whatever made and loves and pities Hemingway and me kept him from touching it any further. Yeah. Okay. That's where I am. And I'm anxious to hear everybody's thoughts, about the novella, but also about the movie. If you saw it, I hope you did. and about this fucking documentary. Excuse my French.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. No, I'm leaving room on the dance floor for anyone to, take the spotlight.
Well, I'll begin.
Okay.
Happy to begin. So I read this book. I read it a couple of times, and then I listened to Donald Sutherland on audio a couple of times. There's 2 books by Harold Bloom where he just gathers criticism.
Yeah.
So I read probably like 40 or 50 papers on it, just different people's opinion. And so I've kind of been all over the map. And then I don't want to say that I didn't like it. Like the very first time I read it, I thought it was an entertaining story. Like it's the kind of writing that is not difficult, no matter what, where you are, what you're used to reading, you can get into it. It's exciting enough. I think there's some beautiful sentences in there. There's some beautiful passages. There's some beautiful phrases like, the sea is, unforgiving and all those there's different things in there that are really nice. But as a whole, I just didn't think it was his best work. So in addition to that, I had never read Ernest Hemingway except for actually this book. So I got his short stories and I read that. These are the ones that are available that they collected for the documentary. So there's, some of his best. That's when I started to really love Ernest Hemingway. I was blown away by some of the short stories. I don't know if it's because I read so many reviews that I just didn't really think that like it was the most amazing story ever. But I did not necessarily think that it was. I did feel like once I read that it was self-parody, I couldn't unsee it. And it felt like a very narcissistic book. And I was like, oh, you think this is so great, but it's really not. So I don't know. That was just my hot take on it. Like,
wait, I mean, you read it before you read his short stories?
I had never read anything by him except for The Old Man and the Sea. And so then I read it again for this podcast. And because I did like it the first time I read it. And I still like it as a story. I just would never go so far as to say like it's a Pulitzer Prize, but it's just not the best of his work, which is, surprising. And I started reading For Whom the Bell Tolls, Farewell Arms, and those are actually both very good. I haven't finished A Farewell to Arms, but they're good. And so I think he's a great writer. I just am like surprised that this is the one that won the awards. It feels a little juvenile, actually. It's like, oh, let me write this sort of journey. It's the great man's journey. The what's the guy who wrote about that? Not Bill Moyers, Joseph Campbell. It's the hero's journey. Like he's going out to the sea and he's catching literally a big fish. How we all have that. And I get that. It's a great story in that sense. But I felt like he tried too hard with the whole Christian, the imagery with the Christ with the on the back and the hands bleeding and the whole 9 yards. And that was my perspective on it. But I do feel like I'm glad that I read some of his other work because I do feel like he's really an amazing writer. And I actually think this story was kind of too long, could have been shorter, but I don't know. That's my opinion. In the movie, the casting from my perspective was terrible for the old man, for Santiago in the 1958.
You mean Spencer Tracy?
Is that who it is? I didn't even realize. Yeah. He's so big and like not gaunt at all. And he looks very sturdy and strong. And I'm like, he doesn't even look that old. He looks like Ernest Hemingway, quite frankly.
Well, I think Hemingway said that he felt he didn't look like a old Cuban fisherman. He looked like an old rich white guy.
Exactly. He looks like Ernest Hemingway. And I was like, this is a terrible casting, but it was basically a walk through the novel. So I did appreciate that.
He did win Best Actor for it.
Tell me what you think, Daniel or Nathan.
I had a very similar reaction. It strikes me that it's just a bit sentimental. I really like Hemingway's earlier work, and this strikes me as like an old man trying to kind of regain his former strength and former youth, and it's a sort of allegory of not being able to do that. And the novel itself, it's kind of appropriate because that's sort of the plot and that's sort of what the book is, right? It's like it's about an old man who's trying to do this, great last thing. And here's Ernest Hemingway trying to do this great last thing. And in that respect, it just feels a little bit silly. And I think it was so praised at the time because people loved Hemingway. They wanted another, great Hemingway book. And it all kind of fit in very well with morality, but public morality at the time. It's a very sort of like, this is what the greatest generation likes to think of itself. And I don't, they are the greatest generation. I don't want to criticize them too greatly, but this is sort of great generation morality in its own, at its most kind of maudlin. I mean, of course Hemingway himself kind of comes before, but I get the sense that it was younger people kind of praising it and liking it at the time. And certainly the greatest generation's whole ethos was very much built by Hemingway. So in any event, I love the guy, but I think he had a really good 10 years. And then probably a couple good short stories after that. And after that, he had a couple other things that were hit or miss. And it strikes me that Old Man and the Sea is one of the things that people I respect like it. Like, Mario Vargas Llosa loves that book. He thinks it's the best Hemingway book. Mm-hmm. And it might, maybe I'm just not understanding it, but I don't feel like it's a culmination of Hemingway's philosophy or Hemingway's kind of approach to life. I feel like it's a departure. I feel like the Hemingway of the 1920s was very much about looking life kind of straight in the eyes, whereas I feel like this is kind of a more kind of romanticized pastoral view of the world. But I kept on thinking about, when reading it, was actually The Little Mermaid, which sounds, I don't mean to be a dick, but like it's okay. All these sea creatures are coming up and they're all my friends, and they're all like, they're practically talking to them, right? Like, I came across, I didn't read much secondary literature, but I came across an essay that pointed out all the errors in just scientific factual errors, like the star Rigel wouldn't appear, in that area around Havana.
Around that time.
Right. Any number of silly stuff like that if it was of any other author, kind of wouldn't matter, but Hemingway is all about getting the facts right, and I was there, and blah, blah, all that stuff. Yeah. And it's just weird, it's weird that he made all those errors. Watching the documentary, it did strike me that this was a pretty brain damaged guy at that point, right? Like, it was kind of a miracle he even wrote it at all.
Yeah.
So, and was this after?
I confess I didn't watch the movie because I took a look at it and I'm like, what the hell is this? It just looks like mid-century. It looks like a word bait. It looked like a word bait. It's the equivalent to something like, this is going to be offensive to everyone, but like something like, Between the World and Me, right? Like the Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Oh, Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Everyone.
Right.
Right, went apeshit over a couple years ago. Like, it was kind of like right place, right time. Is it a great book? Probably not. Is it bad? No. But it's sort of like not the greatest book of all time.
You know what it's good for?
And it's
what?
The movie is good for people who didn't read the book, like high school kids, because it was perfect. Yeah. It was like, basically, it was the book, right? They just, like, the narrator just kind of read the book. I mean, it was the book with the like people in the background doing some things. It was movie. I
don't really think this book was good fodder for a movie, because my feeling is the book takes place mostly in his head, and it's the internal experience that we're reading. Go ahead.
It would have been cool if. See, I just read about the movie, and it has a narration, right?
Yeah, the guy narrates.
Like Spencer Tracy kind of reads you.
He says the lines that he says out loud, but then the narrator does the rest.
Mm-hmm. See, it would have been funny and cool if the movie was literally just like practically silent, and the only dialogue is him going like,
exactly. That would have been more, Hemingway-esque, right? 7/8 of the iceberg is below the water kind of thing.
What do you think, Nathan?
I think this is probably, this makes sense as a story. This seems like the story that someone writes before they kill themselves. No, I'm just kidding. I have a similar. It's not good. This isn't a good story. Hemingway doesn't seem like a good writer.
You mean from this book?
Well, I mean, and after, I mean, having read, East of Eden, I think it was unpublished. The Sun Also Rises. Now, having read this and, hoping for some kind of, luminous masterwork to come out, it seems like all you can say about Hemingway is his personality, like the culture around like hunting and what he does as a male figure, and the writing itself. I kept hoping, I was like, all right, let him die on his way in, and he like comes into shore with the boy watching with just like a skeleton strapped to the mast and like his corpse in the dinghy. But no, like he makes it, or like what if he gets like lost out there and no one knows about the fish, and then he has to deal with like knowing that he had something but can't prove it. Maybe, I mean, there's other stories that would have been, I feel like, more interesting than the kind of like Hallmark wrap up that you get. Like everybody knows it. Everybody's like, wow, it's so big. We'll do it again tomorrow, kiddo.
Well, that's the interesting part is that, there are parts of the story that are like, that we could talk about, we can talk about the story and say like, what was he trying to say here? What's the point? He has some interesting things to say individually. It's just, I don't think it comes across the way that he is imagining that it's going to come across. Like, honestly, I can't help. Maybe it's just because I watched the documentary. I don't know. Can't remember which thought came first, but I can't help but think like, okay, this is Hemingway and these are, and I know everybody's like, no, it's not that. That's not what he was doing. But it feels like The Big Fish is his book and the sharks are the critics. And like the people at the end are the people who just don't appreciate, like, they just thought it was a shark because he started talking and they just don't have time to even look at what's below the surface kind of thing. It just felt so narcissistic to me.
Well, I mean, I think, aren't we all in fairly decent agreement that Ernest Hemingway was a narcissist? I mean,
I think Ernest Hemingway could have used a freaking analyst.
Ernest Hemingway should have stayed with his first wife. I feel like there was a core of goodness to him, and it just got completely corrupted. Sorry, this is like way too much personal criticism.
No, it's okay.
I'm never listening.
But go ahead.
The way he left his first wife was
he left her because what's her name? Pauline, what's her name? Was best friends with her, Hadley, right? As I recall.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And it just, his first wife was such a great editor for him. I think like it just struck me that sort of period of being in Paris with his first wife and, trying out his new style, like that is really like the core of his insight. And his major period of in Our Time, Sun Also Rises, A Farewell to Arms, is sort of just a development of that at the moment of, with his first wife. As he, left his first wife, as he started taking more vacations, like crazy, like trips, and like he just got lost in this sort of fantasy world. I mean, that's my basic take on, and it's a funny thing. He got lost in a sort of persona. He got lost in there's been a lot of debate about careerism in modern writing.
What do you mean?
Christian Lorenzen.
And what did he say?
Who wrote a review about Philip Roth recently that criticized modern American writing for being too careerist, in the sense of that it's all about sort of projecting an image for social media and book talks and stuff like that, rather than just sort of trying to focus on the writing
work.
Yeah. And, the earlier it struck me that, what Hemingway was doing wasn't exactly that, but it was a version. It's like you're creating a public version of yourself, and you're kind of, the work kind of gets sucked into it like a planet into a black hole.
Well, I mean, I think it's a reasonable argument. If you remember the documentary, I mean, not only can we all definitely agree that he was a narcissist, but he definitely liked, being out there and the image of himself. And
I don't actually think he was a narcissist. I think he was.
You didn't think he was a narcissist?
No, I actually don't. I think that he was, because when you read his early work, I don't believe narcissism. I mean, in the sense that we're all a narcissist. Okay, yeah, he has narcissistic tendencies, but like a psychological definition of narcissism, which I'm not saying I'm qualified to say what that is, but, and I know this, I hope this doesn't sound terrible as it comes out, but I just think it's the way that men could tend toward during that time period. Like, I think he just didn't give a shit about anybody but himself. And I don't think that was necessarily narcissism. It was just like, oh, the whole sickening, like the women go out or the men go out and do the things, and the women just like are home supporting and editing and, just keeping the life in order. That ran rampant through his life. And anytime things got difficult, he left. He was like, very like typically, and it's not to say that all men were like this during this time, but it was a very acceptable way for men to be. And he just kind of took it to the nth degree. And that on top of his ego, where he bought into his own myth way too much, I think that's what did him in. But I don't know, like, I mean, yeah, narcissism, but I think it was just not like a...
Was he the firstborn?
I don't remember. I just know him and his sister were very close in age. I think he was, because...
And I mean, we know from the documentary that he and his mother had a terrible relationship, obviously.
Yeah.
Not that that necessarily plays into...
Oh, I think it 100% plays into. That's why I said he needs an analyst. Like all of his gender issues and all that.
No, I'm not talking about it that it doesn't play into the way he treats women. I'm saying it doesn't necessarily play into narcissism, but it definitely, like I say, plays into how you treat women. I think personally, your relationship with or whoever. But my point is that I don't know. I mean, I guess it's always been a sort of generally understood, accepted fact about Hemingway that he was a raging narcissist, because one of the things that critics have said is his books, and you can definitely say this about Old Man and the Sea, are really about him.
The early works were, I thought, fairly self-critical and fairly... it is true that even his early works were kind of about him, but a lot of his early works are just extremely scathing in... It's, the Nick Adams stories in our time, maybe it's not exactly Hemingway, but you could imagine that maybe it's someone who's 2 or 3 clicks away from Hemingway, right? The documentary talked about the rape story,
up in Michigan.
And it's a weird, right. And it's a weird story, partially because you can kind of imagine that man being Hemingway. And it's like saying 2 or 3 clicks away is that. And right. Like,
that's
so
what
there's another Nick Adams story where he breaks up with his girlfriend, like in the most dipshittiest way possible.
Which one is that? After Up in Michigan?
It is the end of something. Is it that one?
Yeah, that's right. End of something. Yeah. And he basically, he says this isn't fun anymore, or something similarly dipshitty. And that wasn't like a nice thing to say about yourself, Hemingway. Like, we all kind of know you're Nick Adams, and that's kind of a pretty scathing, insightful thing that you would say about yourself, but it's probably pretty freaking true. Although it's a funny thing, because that's what the woman who took care of him in Italy was a little bit like. She dumped him. In a weird way. It's like,
Martha, whatever.
Yeah. But in any event, like, I almost feel like that story is him kind of saying, I would probably just do the same thing if, in her situation.
When was it?
It was late 1910s or early 1920s.
I feel like for some reason the number 1923 is coming out for me for the year that it was published.
Yeah.
There was a collection.
Right, in our collection. Correct. Okay, yeah. So, right, it would be probably early 1920s is when he would be writing that.
But I mean, that's the thing that's so interesting about all of it, right? Is that you read The Hills Like White Elephants, or you read these Nick Adams stories, and they're so good because they don't don't tell you anything. They just present a situation. That's why when people say, oh, he's a misogynist, oh, he, I can't agree with that, but it's as though there are two men.
Wait,
there's the man.
Wait. You can't agree that Ernest Hemingway is a misogynist?
No, I can't. Not based on his writing. No, not based on his writing. Not based on all of his writing that I've read. Not saying in one story he might sound like that, but he just presents things in this way. Oftentimes the women come out looking, and maybe it's just my reading because I'm reading it however many years later, but he presents it as though the men are the assholes and the women are.
You're talking about the short stories, right?
The short stories. Yeah, because there's no women obviously in The Old Man and the Sea.
Well, no, there is a woman. First of all, there are two women. One was the woman at the end, right, who thought that the skeleton of the marlin was actually a shark, but the sea. Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. He did have the allegory to the sea there. But my point is that when you read these other stories, he just has a very authentic take on human relationships in a way that's just, he just presents the situation exactly as it happens. And it's for you to, and obviously he puts a lot of metaphor and symbolism in there, but it's really oftentimes I think the women come out ahead, like in the Hills Like White Elephants, in my opinion. There's this one line in there, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something like, he watched the people getting on the trains kind of going on with life, and he just couldn't go on. He couldn't understand how everybody could just kind of get on the trains and do their business. And he was just a juvenile. He couldn't take on the risk. And you didn't read that story, so I shouldn't be talking about it. No, I haven't read that one, no.
But it's he does have some really amazing insights. So it's there are these two men. There's the man who has all of these amazing insights about human relationships. And then there's this person who, I don't know what he said to these women to get them to marry him. But if it was anything like his writing, I can imagine it was very persuasive. He was really, in that way, he really understood people, and he knew exactly how to get to them and exactly what to say to them. As I recall, I'm thinking these short stories were written, most of them were before he went to war? No. Or was it after it was World War One? Yeah, it was World War One.
Yeah, it was after World War One.
A lot of them are about like the soldiers,
right?
Something or other. There's several where the soldier's home, where he comes back from war. So a lot of his writing is, but I mean, what writer doesn't base what they write? No, I definitely believe a writer, fiction, nonfiction, whatever, writes what they know, right, which is generally them, but not all what they know. But I'm thinking when you talk about him in the way you're talking about him, Jen, in terms of his short stories, at least his short stories, a lot of them have been hailed as incredible, but I believe that most of them were written before he started having these head injuries that he started experiencing through life. Now, does that mean that contributed to some of the way he wrote, how some of the books came out or novels came out? I don't know. I definitely think you can make an argument regarding The Old Man and the Sea. I don't know about From the Bell Tolls or Farewell to Arms or Sun Also Rises or something. But it is disturbing. And that was something I had just learned in the documentary, that I would have to say he had major head injuries, at least 5, right? Yeah, it was crazy. I'm shocked. Now, I mean, the other thing that you have to think about also, and I have to wonder, is obviously this existence of depression in him. Now, I mean, keep in mind that his father killed himself, right? One of his wives did, but that's a long story. And I think one of his brothers killed himself, right? I think. And I remember that, actually. I don't know. I might be getting it wrong, but.
Wait, what is the claim?
That one of the brothers killed him. His brother killed himself, but I thought he only had a sister, so I don't know.
I'm sorry. Maybe it was his sister. I'm sorry. The father. All I know is the father killed himself. One of his siblings killed himself, and then we have his granddaughter, who we know about, Margot Hemingway, killed herself, and there's one other. So there was just this heavy string of suicides in his family that obviously is tied to depression. So obviously there was this strong thread of depression throughout. But it seems to me it's kind of interesting if you think about it. And I guess we'll have to look at it on a timeline. But the short stories, which are phenomenal, were written early on in his writing life, before a majority of these head injuries, First World War, Second World War, Spanish Civil War, whatever. And then he fell down in a couple of places. If you look at the timeline, and then you can see, now, back to the criticism of The Old Man and the Sea, which is toward the end of his life, 10 years before he killed himself. I can't say for me that there aren't problems with it. I love the book much more than the movie. The movie just fucking, I was like, God, this is so fucking boring. This is just not what it should be, you know, and this movie should not have been made. I think it was just made to make, you know, Spencer Tracy look so, you know, amazing or whatever. It just, you know, I can't imagine making a film. What do you think, Nathan? I mean, you being an actor and everything, what do you think about the idea of making you know, thinking about that visual, you know, thing about making a movie out of this particular book?
That's funny. You know, no, I didn't see it, but I hear but what you've said about it makes sense of why it would not work that way. I mean, I can see it particularly well done now as an animated feature. There's
it was
lot,
done.
you know, that it was animated.
Yeah, there is an animated feature made of it.
That makes sense. I wonder, but that's not the one you're talking of.
No, that's not the one we're talking about. We're talking about the 1958 version.
No, we're talking about the 1958 Spencer Tracy.
No, I'd be interested to see the animated version because, you know, the one thing that Ernest Hemingway does well is describe and, you know, give a, you know, lay of the scene, and it's very action oriented. And, you know, I put my left foot down to hold this and grab my left hand, you know, that kind of a thing. No, I mean, the fact that it's all in internal narration too. No, I'm sorry. I don't know that I can, you know, offer any, you know, any insights here, about like the movie, but
no, you can, but I'm talking about, what do you think about doing that even? Like, why would someone make a film out of this particular book of all things?
Well, I mean, I guess it's, you know, it's easy to see, it's easy to visualize, you know, and there's a lot of things that, you know, I think there's room for growing, you know, putting more art onto something afterwards. So, you know, bringing a story to life is not necessarily a bad thing. So, you know, I think No Country for Old Men was a good example of a movie done well. You might as well, I mean, you'll miss some things if you just watch the movie. So I would never say to anybody, watch the thing and not read the thing. Because it seems like if there's anything worth making something out of, it came from a book, and it's rarely, I can't think of a time that it's, except for one instance where it might have been improved, and that's in the Fight Club adaptation to film. It substantively changed the ending of the movie, and I think was more powerful for it. But yeah, no, I mean, there's just an inclination to do this with things and visualize. And, you know, it's an easy novel to see in your head. I think that it's worthwhile maybe if you're a naturalist, because it seemed like Hemingway was. He had an appreciation for the sea and the process, and, you know, using the, you know, it seemed grounded. And that's where I think a lot of his power comes from, is he's telling you real things, though. They might not have an interesting plot, but the details are, you know, really one of a hunter and of a fisher, and things that you would notice and see watching a bird circling to give you an indication of where a school was, things like that. The strategy of, you know, eating and catching fish, and him thinking things out. I mean, all that's really interesting on a whatever journalistic or, you know, documentary level. So I can see why people are interested in like the content of this story. But, you know, as far as why people do these things, I mean, a lot of it is misguided. I think they try and latch onto something that's already powerful, and then, you know, tag their name onto it to get some of the glory. So
yeah, I see what you're saying.
As far as the book goes, since we've really not discussed it at all, maybe we should.
Yeah.
There were some really good things in here that I thought were insightful. This will probably be my last line, so I'm saying it too early. But there's the part where he said he was sorry for the birds, especially the small, delicate, dark terns that were always flying and looking and almost never finding. And he thought, the birds have a harder life than we do, except for the robber birds and the heavy, strong ones. Why did they make birds so delicate and fine as those sea swallows when the ocean can be so cruel? And I thought that was, I don't know, I think it's more interesting to read this book as a man who had spent the life the way that he did, knowing everything that you know about him, and then to read this book to try to catch glimpses of who he was, because it's not a good story, in my opinion. So trying to say, like, what did he see himself as? How did he?
Wait a minute. Wait. Can I step back for a second? Why do you think it's not a good story.
I just think it's pretty, it's like, oh, he was an old man. His eyes were bright. I just feel like it's just.
Well, think about the plot. Think about the plot. The plot is this old man goes out in the ocean.
Goes out for a big fish, and it's like Moby Dick. It's not Moby Dick, but
except without the tragedy. Yeah.
And it's like, what has he actually overcome? Because in the very beginning of the story, he says, he was not like smart enough, or I don't know exactly what he said. He was too simple to realize. He was humble, and he didn't know when it had happened, but he was a humble man. Like he had humility. And then basically he goes out too far, and he does this great thing, but he realizes that, he really couldn't see it through to the end because of these sharks. And, so he didn't actually win. So whether it was a tragedy or a triumph, I think that's up for debate. But the fact is, he walked away with, maybe some of that hubris lost, right? He got over some of that. And it's like, well, he said he was humble in the very beginning. He should have fucking known that he can't go out there and catch a 1,500-pound fish and carry it back by himself. So clearly he wasn't that humble. So it was just mucked up.
Or he was not that he wasn't that humble, but think about it. He hasn't caught a fish in 84 days. It's a big deal, right? Big deal. I mean,
that it's happened before, but yeah.
But at least right at this moment, it's a big deal. And he catches this the biggest fish he's ever caught in his life. He achieves the greatest thing that he's ever done in his life, the thing that is most important to him, fishing. But then he loses it. His achievement disintegrates. Now, what is Hemingway telling us?
I mean,
he could be saying something about himself, or, what is he saying about going out and seeking and trying to achieve what you have always dreamed of achieving? I mean, what is he saying?
I think we're supposed to really admire this character and, really say, okay, these are the traits and the qualities of the ideal man, the Christ-like man. He endures, he has faith, he is strong, he is humble, he is all of these things, right? Meanwhile, poking fun at like Joe DiMaggio for like can not play because he's got a bone spur, and the guy's like, oh, I bet that must be terrible. While we, the reader, all know that a bone spur is no freaking big deal, and you take ibuprofen for it. So it's like we're supposed to sort of admire this character, in my opinion, and think he's so great and so, he doesn't even realize the amazing thing that he's attempting to do and how hard that is, and he's doing it. He's kind of foiled by these sharks, right? He can't make it back home, but everybody knows that he did the great thing. And I just think, I don't know. I just think it's not the kind of character I admire. Like, that seems like those kind of slave morality type values that I'm just like, I don't really think that that's all that amazing. That you go out and you like torture yourself to catch this fish and you don't have a fish in the end, but you've tortured yourself long enough. And so now I don't know. I mean,
I don't know. All right. So we're not supposed to admire this, character or whatever. But
I think we are supposed to admire him. But
maybe we are.
It's interesting that you mentioned slave morality. I would think that in my own head, I would have thought that one would probably more easily categorize this with the sort of like Nietzschean, like I'm out to win the big thing, you know what I mean? But it's interesting that bringing in the religion, it's true, it kind of brings it into, for whatever reason, Hemingway in the story wants to bring his sort of tough kind of atheistic philosophy into the fold of pretty normal mid-century Judeo-Christian kind of morality. I kind of almost wonder whether he thought, I need to write something that's going to be assigned in high schools.
I know. It's very full of like, oh, here's the, here's.
I don't know about that.
I don't think he was thinking that, but does anybody remember, remember he was writing a book and he thought it was like best book ever, and it was horrible?
It's like Time Something Into the Leaves, or what was that called?
Something so bad, and he thought it was his greatest work, and it was really terrible. It was right after.
It was a book that he wrote before The Old Man and the Sea, 10 years before.
Yeah.
He thought it was wonderful, and it was trashed throughout. I mean, it was trashed with every critic. They hated it. And I don't know if that's why he didn't write for 10 years. I think it was much more complicated than that, because I think, a lot of other things happened. Plus he was, destroying himself. But I can't remember. I was reading about it last night and I can't remember the name of this book, but it was like something and it had to do with leaves and trees.
Yeah, I just remember the funniest part, the documentary when Mario Vargas Llosa like describing the earth moving beneath the woman and he can't get it out because he's laughing so hard because it's like the most ridiculous.
Wait, what?
What? Oh my God, it's so funny. So
I don't remember this.
So Mario Vargas Llosa, who is awesome.
Yeah.
He's describing how ridiculous this book is. And I believe it's this one that he's talking about. And he said,
Oh, no. It was For Whom the Bell Tolls. He was like the con voice. The pro voice was John McCain and the con voice was Mario Vargas Llosa.
And he says like, there's like, he's just so full of crap because he's talking about how he's making love to the woman and the earth is shaking beneath her, but he can't get it out because he starts laughing as he describes it. And it's just the best. It's like, yeah, Ernest, the earth is not shaking.
Right.
Beneath you as you make love to him, just in case you were wondering. So
I think the name of the book is Across the River and Into the Trees. Yeah, that he wrote in 1950 or something. And it was just panned as the worst thing ever known to man.
Yeah, I haven't looked at that one.
And it really, as I understand it, that really devastated him because he thought it was one of his best works. And again, we can go back to what you were saying. I saw this in someone's analysis as well, that they saw that the old man in the sea was, Hemingway, and the sharks were the critics,
Yeah.
I know. I mean, it's kind of crazy, but I've read that. I've seen that.
Oh, that's like in like 50. Like I've read probably every criticism. It's kind of went down the rabbit hole.
Right.
I mean, you wouldn't believe that. The interesting thing for me, like that came out of all this was when you read a story, and you start to analyze. I used to feel so sort of like, oh, there's a right way and there's a wrong way to interpret this book. And I'm sure there's some ways better than others. But this kind of made me realize that, we bring what we bring to the story. And if it's the kind of story, which his short stories are, that the more you look at them, the more you see and the more you understand. This one, the more you look at it, the less you see and the less it makes sense and the more incoherent his attempts at allegory or symbolism or whatever are. Because if you're Christ, okay, so you're Christ. So what's the shark? What's the shark in that scenario? And not the shark, the marlin. This was not, in my opinion, his best, but I do like the.
But it's the only one of his that won the Pulitzer, and
they were just like, oh, we got to give this guy this. We got to give this guy this at the end here.
And it initiated the Nobel.
But Pulitzer and the Nobel mean less than zero. There are so many Pulitzer winners who are garbage. I know. There are so many Nobel winners that are garbage. They're just index of what was popular at the time.
No, even then.
Not even popular. Like amongst the educated folk. Right? What they glom onto, and half the time, it's just kind of fads. Like a lot of literary life is just sort of following fads and feeding the narcissism of the upper middle class. So like I feel like the Pulitzer and the Nobel are mostly an index of that. I mean, so to something, I feel like the test of time is just something that you can't get around, and in a way you should give Nobels to only to people who are like 50 years, only for books that are like 50 years old or more, which is why when they give the sort of lifetime achievement Nobel for some late work that's kind of crap, like they shouldn't say, oh yeah, Old Man of the Sea won it. They should have said all his work from 1920 to 1935. Yeah, that doesn't fit on the form though, right?
Yeah.
You're making me feel great about being a writer there, Daniel.
Well, so I'm just curious, I don't mean to, so what other things did you like about this book, Laura? I'm not saying, there are obviously some very good passages here, so.
Oh yeah, no, there are definitely some great lines and stuff. I mean, again, the other thing is to look at it in context. I mean, Hemingway really did change the way writers write in America. He changed it. He changed the style. He changed the content. up in Michigan, when it was written, it was about a rape. It was about a date rape, essentially, and nothing like that had ever been written. Hemingway, I'm sorry, in many ways changed the way writers write in this country, if not the world, in terms of, like I say, style and content. Now, he's not the only one. I agree. I'm just saying that he is seen as, or looked upon as, like the first. Now, does that mean that's why do I think he's great? I think the short stories are great. Am I happy with this book, The Old Man and the Sea? Not necessarily at all. But at the same time, the one thing I did appreciate I don't know why it ended the way it ended. I don't know if I would have ended it that way. But then again, I am born and writing, 50, 100 years, whatever, after Hemingway first created this sort of revolutionary way of writing. I'm not saying that it necessarily is the greatest, but in terms of the style of very simple, for lack of a better word, very out there, very definite use of language, and the content, very fact-based, very honest, genuine. So, well, maybe not genuine, but honest. But my point is, we're looking at The Older Man and the Sea, which in my opinion, I think it was his last book. He wrote one other book, and I think it was published posthumously after he died. I just wanted to look at that, really the last great work that was written by a man who is considered revolutionary in terms of the way he wrote.
As far as this book goes, I want to say one thing about it. If you look at this book, or for me, when I looked at this book through just, you look at it through a lot of lenses, but when I look at it through the lens of the end of a life of a man, I thought it was very poignant, because I liked what he said throughout the book that had to do with his age. Like there's the part where what he dreamed about. I'll read a couple of things. One is on page 49 and 50 of my book, which is I don't know if you guys have the one that I have. It is a 200 or 127 page book. And he said, he's talking about when he had caught another fish that was a female and the male had stayed with her. And he said, then while the old man was clearing the lines and preparing the harpoon, the male fish jumped high into the air beside the boat to see where the female was, and then went down deep. His lavender wings, that were his pectoral fins, spread wide, and all his wide lavender stripes showing. He was beautiful, the old man remembered, and he had stayed. That was the saddest thing I ever saw with them, the old man thought. The boy was sad too, and we begged her pardon and butchered her properly. So I kind of see, when I read that, some of these as commentary on what it's like to stay, to have the end of life for this man. His wife was not with him anymore. He was lonely. He no longer dreamed of anything.
And he was lonely.
He was lonely. He was very lonely. And, in a sense, he needed to go out and do this thing on his own. And there was something beautiful in that. There was something really poignant in what it means to kind of look at your life at the end and wonder what it was all for. There's several comments about, this is what I was born to do. What if I could have been something better? But this seems to be what I was born to do. And he would show the fish how strong he was, even though he was an old man. And there's that sense of end of life. What have I accomplished in this life? And so it didn't really matter that it was the biggest fish he ever caught, because this wasn't going to solidify him as an amazing fisherman. His reputation had already been earned and sealed, and people knew who he was and how he was. And
except he hadn't caught a fish in 84 days.
Yeah, but he had gone 87 days at another time. This is the thing with fishermen, right? I know, but if it wasn't, I agree with that. However, that's one of the first things the book tells us. Right. It had been a long time, and that's an important thing. I'm not saying that's not important. I'm just saying through the lens of, that's even more so to the point, right? It had been a while since he had really had a great event happen in his life. And, when you think about what it means to become older, there's a certain point in your life at which you realize you're not going to really do a great thing anymore. The years of going to college and starting an amazing career and doing a big thing, that's kind of behind you. There's something about...
I feel like for me, that was last week. But anyway, go on.
No.
So I think there's something about that lens of looking through this book of just, he's had his life. He's a very good fisherman. You learn throughout the book, even though it's factually incorrect, that he's a very knowledgeable man about the sea and about the weather and about the like this particular patch of ocean that he fishes in. And there's a lot there in terms of what he's gained throughout his life. But he's kind of past his prime. He's in the winter, he's not doing a lot of great things. And he needs one last hurrah, right? And he kind of goes out and he tries to get that last hurrah. And he still got it, but he wishes he had the boy, right? Because he's not quite got it. And in the end, he's beaten. The fish is eaten by the sharks.
Yeah, but he's also older than he's ever been before, and he's caught the biggest fish he ever has in his life.
He caught the biggest fish, but he wasn't able to keep it, which kind of tells me like, this is it for you, old man. Yes, you could, and you have done these things, and that's all of your wits and your smarts. That was great. That got you that big fish. But at the end of the day, you need to be stronger and younger, and you need the help of others. And you don't have that in your later years. That's what you're missing.
But the other thing that confuses me is, why does it end the way it ends?
Well, I mean, I think that's the point. It's a failure. I mean, the whole thing, it's a giant failure. He was out there, and though he did what he wanted to, the entire time he said, I wish I had the boy. Shouldn't have gone out this far. Not going to make it back in. Even like with the clubbing that female or whatever, like, yeah, they did it. They killed this thing, but then they regretted it. And, that was one of the saddest things. I'm not sure if it was the book that we're talking about I think it was unpublished. Anyway, East of Eden is another book of his. I think it was unpublished.
No, that's John Steinbeck.
Oh, shit. Sorry. Oops.
That's one of my favorite books. But
I thought it was great. Well, now I have less credit for Ernest Hemingway than I thought I did.
Write that one. That's
damn.
That's my craft guy. Yeah.
Well, I thought there was a hunting story that he told in there, and I thought it was very Hemingway. But anyway, no, I'll leave that completely to the side. All right. Well, no, yeah, shit.
But my question is pinpointing the fact that why didn't he die at the end?
Oh, he should have. I mean, I would have liked that. Just as like a story. At least it would have been more humble.
But again,
something. I mean, what I'm saying is, okay. What are you saying, Laura?
Well, I was just going to say that, is that because I'm reading this in 2021 that I think he should have died? Would I have thought that in 1953?
Yeah, because like Hemingway characters die all the time. It's one of the, it's such a common like Hemingway thing to do. I mean, maybe he wanted them to survive for a change of pace.
No, I think there must be a reason why he didn't die.
I think he lived because we're looking at the old man thing. Like if you die, you're going to be a tragic hero, right? But to me, that's the point of this, is that he is an old man. He's past his prime. So now, like, the depth of humiliation is to not die of sea. It's to go back with your empty carcass of a, failure, and have the young boy who is the next generation kind of going to have to take care of you. And he says, like, at the end, he talks about how he's going to, like, go out and he's going to teach him these things. I kind of got the sense that metal taste that he had, like, his death is not, like, he's not.
It's not far.
I think he dies in the end with the dreams of the lions, probably.
Maybe, because he's asleep.
I mean, and that's the only thing he could think about any longer was that fixation. I mean, that's just a maybe, but I'm trying to add on to your point there, Jen. I think that's true, is that this is the end of a line, and maybe there's dreams of doing more, but that's, yeah.
And now he needs to pass on this knowledge to this boy, and they kind of talk about it at the very end, like, I'm going to go back, and this is what, basically this is what I learned. We got to take this and we got to take this. And now you can come with me. I've kind of proven myself in the sense that at least you could, I can catch a fish, and maybe your parents will be okay with, you coming out with me again. Or maybe this is all something he's kind of telling him because he knows, because it is ambiguous. He had the metal taste and it worried him, and it worried me, quite honestly. And I thought, maybe this is something he's saying, like, on the battlefield as the person's dying. Yeah, we're going to go home tonight. We're going to have a couple of beers, and it's going to be great. And we'll have a couple of ladies. And
I hear the helicopter. Kind of it's coming.
It's coming. Right before they die.
Yeah.
Can I raise a question?
Yeah.
Is this ultimately kind of endorsing some sort of Judeo-Christian version of morality, or is this Hemingway saying, okay, fine, I'm not a theist, but there's a phrase in the criticism of a religion of man and perhaps he was using Christian imagery to suggest something like that. Like, to the extent there are evocations of Christ and the man himself is a sort of Christ.
My personal opinion.
You know, I'm not sure he's endorsing Christ so much that he's kind of creating a sort of replacement secular Christ. I kind of wonder if that was his idea and kind of why, maybe that's why he invested so much in.
Can you cite something in the text that reflects that?
Well, there's one of the more interesting criticisms I read was it was about Christianity, and I don't remember who wrote it at this point, but it was kind of, the point was that all of this Christian this imagery that was in there was to establish the kind of discipleship. Like, we're supposed to think of it insofar as there is a sense of discipleship toward like his craft.
I have a quote lined up. I can just read it. I think this is when he's struggling with the sharks, and he says aloud, "There is no translation for this word, and perhaps it is just a noise such as a man might make involuntarily, feeling the nail go through his hands and into the wood," which is
right. Yeah, I've got that
dish.
Oh, he even
Yes,
said,
it is.
like, in an interview, he even says,
Oh,
I
really?
have all the Christ imagery in there. Like, he totally meant to do that as Christ imagery.
Yeah, the mask going up the hill at the end. Da, da, da.
I mean, the whole
Oh,
thing,
yeah, right.
the ropes on the back and the blood dripping down and the whole thing.
Right.
It says, there's an interesting, this one says here, in The Old Man and the Sea, Hemingway presents a parable of practical Christianity. The theology of Christianity may no longer be valid, but as Santiago's life illustrates, a practical Christian experience may yet be the best course open to man. To be humble, to endure, to launch out into the deep, to have faith, hope, and love. These achievements are still the most rewarding. The Old Man and the Sea illustrates the essence of Christian discipleship and does so in specifically biblical terms. So I don't think he's espousing Christ and God as sort of like faith or whatever, because even like he says, why did they make birds this way? Meaning God in this period of Christianity, God would be the one making the birds, right?
Right.
But he doesn't say that. So I think he's trying to get a point across about the enduring and whenever there's like a big thing in Christianity, we're supposed to sort of like die to Christ, right? You're supposed to be broken by him and understand that you need him like in all things. And so there's that quality to this in the sense that he thinks that he can do this great thing, but he's gone out too far and he is beaten. And so he cannot do it alone. Like, he cannot do this on his own. So there's that sense throughout the end of the book. He wishes he had the boy. He endures all of this pain, and he endures this lifetime of this particular vocation. And I again, because I don't think it's a great book, I do think it's kind of muddled the way that he does it. It's like he has a good idea to use. Like, I feel like in other books, when we read the Faulkner book, which one?
The Sound and the Fury?
Sound and the Fury, or even the book the Sula book by Toni Morrison, when they invoked Christ, there was a reason that it helped you understand the story in a better way. Like, you're like, oh, okay, so that character is kind of like in Sula, that character sort of was reflecting back the morality of what was going on in that time, because he was the guy that came back from the war, if you remember Sula, and he took on all of the bad things that happened during that time. He was treated poorly. He just had a shitty life, right, after that. And it made you understand that character more because he was in that way Christ-like. He took on all of sort of the blame, right? Or the badness that came out of that time period. And then in the Faulkner book, I forget the character's name, who was like basically a toddler, and the first narrator, he was Christ-like in the way that he reflected the morality of all the other characters back to them, throughout each way he saw. And so it was like useful. I thought, okay, I could see why you would do that with this sort of symbolism. And it feels like Ernest Hemingway was like, let me get some Christ in there. Let me get some, some ropes and some blood, and I'll really just hammer home the suffering of this guy. So we'll just really admire him. And it felt kind of ham-fisted to me, personally.
Huh.
That was my...
I find it interesting that we are all kind of like, about the book, but it was considered a masterpiece.
And Faulkner, who's awesome, said what you said.
Mm.
Right?
Yes, that it was Hemingway's best.
I feel really badly when this happens to me. Like, I feel like I'm really messing.
Well, yeah, but I wonder if it's because we're reading this now, you know, what, 100 years, what is it?
Yeah, because we've kind of ditched
70, 80 years after. I mean, life is very different. Literature is very different where we are now. So I'm wondering if that's why.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is in the sense of like a story that doesn't work. I mean, like it's a story.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it does. I mean, it's not that like it's, you know, necessary like bad writ large, but just comparatively given the history of what we've come to learn afterwards and the stories we've heard afterwards and like what's been accomplished with story, it's not as powerful as all those others. And so, you know, to, you know, have the sticker on it that says, you know, big, great book, Nobel, to read it and not be altered or shifted in your worldview or mindset or have any revelations, it feels like a letdown because it's not, you know, a long time ago was a long time ago. I had this, you know, there were, like, I think about what was accomplished being relative again. And, you know, there weren't that many writers. There weren't as many people in the world or the country or, you know, like the bar was lower.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Speaking of the time period, I just finished this book called At the Existentialist Cafe by Sarah Bakewell. I don't know if anybody's read that. It's not an amazing book. I enjoyed it, but it was kind of about this time period in Paris when all these existential, I mean, it's just an amazing period of time with Sartre and de Beauvoir and Heidegger and Arendt and just so many people. And he was there, right? He was in Paris at this time too.
Right in the middle of it.
He was in the middle of all this. And so in a sense, it was an amazing time to be alive in terms of writing and creative work. And I thought, wow, how awesome, you know, and I think that was part of it. I think he did very well in that environment. He seemed to be at his best, and maybe it was just the time when he was in Paris before, when he was with his first wife, like you said.
His first wife,
time for him, because I think he did some really good stuff during that time.
Yeah, and he was the star too. He was when he was there. You know,
there were lots of stars during that time.
I know. But I wanted to ask about the documentary. How does everyone feel about Ernest Hemingway now? Is it different than before you saw the documentary?
I kind of knew all the things in the documentary. I not the details, but I had a general sense of what the myth of Hemingway was. Yeah. And I felt like the documentary just confirmed it.
I had more pity for him, actually. Or I don't know, pity's a terrible word, but that is kind of what it is. I wouldn't say sympathy or empathy for him after watching the documentary, because I do feel like he was alive at a time when I think he was a pretty empathic person. He could sense. He was a very deep thinker, right? I think you can get that from his writing. And he was probably very, very confused. And he lived in a time when I don't think it was okay to talk about your feelings and your confusion and to show anything less than bravado. I don't know that that's true, because there's certainly many other people that did not behave the way that he did during this time. Yeah, but I think he was somebody who was just very human, and you saw all of it. I think he made a lot of mistakes, but I don't think he was all good or all bad. I certainly don't think he was all good, but I don't think he was all bad. And I think we judge it today. I think if you did a profile of a lot of men during that time period, this would be like, this sounds like my grandfather, you know, this sounds like my great grandfather. So I don't think we could judge him in this time period fairly.
I was very sad for him. I felt more sad for him than I ever had. And I think maybe when you feel sad for someone, that's sort of a, you know, that's sort of a warmer feeling that you have for that person. Obviously it came across as more human. We all knew about the multiple wives and stuff like that, but there were certainly details that I was not aware of that went into it. And certainly seeing his son speak, Patrick, was a little weird. It also spurred me to do a lot more reading on the biography of Hemingway and his background and everything. But I think the ultimate thing was that I felt really sad for him, knowing the emotional stress that he had gone through, thinking about the multiple suicides that surrounded him and how in the world is that I know that Mariel Hemingway, his granddaughter, has done a lot of work on suicide and prevention of suicide because of its huge presence in her family's history. But and then I did not realize he had 5 or 6 head injuries. And and not small head injuries, like major head injuries, and that said a lot to me. That, combined with the horrible relationship with his mother and lots of other things. But wow, I was like, oh my God, it's amazing the man could even write a single word.
I didn't realize that. And especially knowing what we know about CTE or whatever.
Yeah. So I just felt much, pardon me?
War is just going to war in general.
Oh yeah. Oh God.
Yeah.
Exactly. It made me feel more empathetic toward him than I ever have felt, because, there are arguments he was a misogynist and whatever narcissistic qualities there were, but I felt a little more empathy to his position after I saw it. So, but anyway, I have to go. So I was wondering if you want to do favorite lines, if you have any, if there are any in this huge, tome of 127 pages.
Hey, I think I got one. It's about a paragraph. This is where he first catches the marlin. I think first starts nibbling on the line, and bites. And the paragraph is like this. So is as follows: the fish never changed his course nor his direction all that night, as far as the man could tell from watching the stars. It was cold after the sun went down, and the old man's sweat dried cold on his back and his arms and his old legs. During the day, he had taken the sack that covered the bait box and spread it in the sun to dry. After the sun went down, he tied it around his neck so that it hung down over his back, and he cautiously worked it down under the line that was across his shoulders now. The sack cushioned the line, and he found a way of leaning forward against the bow so that he was almost comfortable. The position actually was only somewhat less intolerable, but he thought of it as almost comfortable. What I like about that is that he's just kind of describing what it's like to fish. He's not doing his editorializing regarding the Hemingway philosophy. This is just, it has a feeling of like, well, this is what it's like to fish around the waters of Cuba. And when he's doing that, it's all pretty good. Maybe this should have been a short story with minus all the editorializing, minus all the, the philosophizing. It maybe would have been a more interesting short story.
He was actually, the fisherman was actually based on fisherman friend of Hemingway's, an actual guy. There's a picture of him out there somewhere.
Right.
Jen?
I think I might take yours. I'm afraid this might be yours, Laura.
It better not be, or else I'm going to have to kill you.
But the old man always thought of her, she's talking about the sea, but the old man always thought of her as feminine and as something that gave or withheld great favors. And if she did wild or wicked things, it was because she could not help them. The moon affects her as it does a woman, he thought. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying it's interesting.
Well, and also, as I understand it, that was in some criticism that I read somewhere, that was them pointing out his treatment of women very poorly in this book. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, what women? And then I realized, oh, the sea. That's the woman that he was talking about. Yeah. And when you look at it in comparison to how he thinks about himself as a fisherman, or talks about the strength of the marlin, anyway, I've just seen criticism.
I'll just say, and I will incite some anger in some, I'll just say he's not wrong. He's not wrong about that. He is not wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, what was it? There's that, so some line like, no, never mind. It's not in the book, but I heard another one that was similar to that. It's like women have it so hard that you can't really blame them for, that you can't say that anything's cruel.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd like to read that one. No,
I think someone had taken my other, so Laura, you go on ahead. It was, whenever I thought that he also wrote East of Eden, it made more sense to me, but the reluctant hunter who's like, yeah, I love you, but I'm going to kill you.
Oh, you said at the beginning, yep.
Oh, no. All right, wait a minute. Mine is fish, he said softly, aloud.
Yeah.
I'll stay with you until I am dead. And I said, I really love that because, first of all, he doesn't die, or does he?
Or does he?
I just loved when he was talking to the fish and saying things like that I respect you so much, but I'm going to kill you at the end of this day. I love that idea that, loving and respecting an animal or human being or someone, but, I'm going to kill you anyway.
It's an interesting thing because there's almost a defense of hunting or a defense of sort of hunter-gatherer life. I don't know. I mean, it's like we're not above nature. We're part of nature. Guess what? We're basically designed to go running after fucking animals and killing them, right? And yes, is ought, just because that's kind of what we're designed for doesn't mean that we should do it. But, it is sort of inherently meaningful to us. And I think, if I had to do a summary of what his philosophy of man is, it's something like that, we're just a part of nature. And, these sort of things like hunting are going to feel meaningful to us, and why not do that, right? Like it seems silly that we think that we're above it and, hunting is so bad, blah, blah, blah. But, actually that might be what life is all about, stuff like that.
Well, that it's a part of our nature, you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a line in the documentary where he's defending bullfighting and he says something to the effect of, it's like a hedonist kind of philosophy, I guess. Like, good is what feels when, if it feels good, it's good.
Then it is good.
Yeah. Like, and if he said something, he put a little qualification, like if you feel good about it afterwards, then it's still good or something like that. Like there was a little bit of a qualification, but he has some sort of idea of wanting to go back to a sort of more natural attitude to the emotions, right? But
but that was that. Yeah. No, I was just gonna say
we hunted the mastodons to extinction, so like there's also an issue.
Yeah.
Like, how many fish are there?
Too, I think the conflict. I just think that the conflict is interesting in the story. At least with that, the saddest thing he ever felt, he says, is killing that one animal that had a mate.
Yeah.
Right.
And that sticking with you. I know that there's a lot of hunter tales out there where something happened, and that's what I was going to bring up with East of Eden, because in that story it's a hunting story, and he's going out hunting an elephant with his father or a rhino or something, and they kill it, and at the end he's like, this was fucking sick and I'll never do this again. How dare we take the horns from this thing like it was peaceful. Yeah. And other instances of a hunter going out and surprising like a baby bear or something and having to kill it quickly in the heat of the moment so that it wouldn't be attacked, but then feeling terrible that this, and then like they don't hunt anymore. And so I guess it's fraught. And just because it comes from like a tradition and a heritage, I think there's a lot of latent problem, like things that add up over the lifetime of it, that maybe the regrets are interesting to look at.
So I think Hemingway is trying to respond to that view. Why should you feel guilty about killing a fucking rhinoceros besides, maybe practical issues of like, okay, fine, they're an endangered species, and if you keep on killing them, they're all dying. But if putting endangered species issue aside, it's fun to hunt. It's fun to kill. It's fun to kill other animals that are like much bigger than you and outsmart them. And
wait, are you saying that's what Hemingway is saying?
Things. Yeah. And I think he's right in a way. I mean, I think, I think that you shouldn't, go hunt animals to extinction, right? But I can easily see why it would be fun to hunt, and it's really like a part of human life. And, why are we trying to impose, act like animals are part of the sphere of creatures that we have moral obligations, but the normal human moral obligations to.
Are you saying this is what Hemingway's saying?
I think it's implied. I think it's implied.
The only thing that makes me wonder that he's saying that though is the turtles with the hearts that beat forever and how he felt about them.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Well, and this is a whole other topic that if we do have to go, we can't really get into, but there's answers and responses to a lot of the things that you just brought up, Daniel. I mean, beside there, so the question, what is there besides trophy hunting? Well, there's other things like a spiritual connection that you can find between all life, for example. The fact that elephants can paint paintings now is not something that 100 years ago, I think, man knew about or would have considered in its slaughter of them. And there's...
And also, again, what you're saying, like about that time, it's a we have to look at the historical context as well as that Hemingway, again, and I don't think we're going to dispute this, putting aside the narcissism, putting aside the likely misogyny. I mean, he was like, he played that man role. It's like, I'm going to be macho. He had a machismo type thing going, and so I think that played in when he uses, that plays into the concept and the idea of being able to take over other creatures, to be able to hunt and I mean, these days we're in a different historical context.
Not that is different though. I mean, I'm from the South, and some of the most ardent conservationists I know are hunters. Like if you watch these hunting shows, which I used to be my stepdad would sit and watch these deer hunting shows, and it's like the way that they talk about these animals and with such respect, and the way that they try to kill them, and it's very, very similar to what's happening in this particular book. And so it's a balance. And so, we did kill the mastodons or whatever, but the people who are really involved in this hunting world actually really care about the circle of life, and they care about the imbalance of if you don't kill the deer, then this is going to happen to this. And so, I mean, I think Daniel has a point here about kind of saying that there is a way in which you can do this that honors nature and you're a part of the sort of the circle of life. Because why are we the only ones to your argument? Why are we the only ones that can't do that? Lions go out and kill their prey. They eat meat, and we don't judge them as being, amoral or immoral or whatever. So I don't know. I think there's an argument to be made on that end.
Yeah, to be clear, I don't like hunting either. I'm kind of trying to play devil's advocate here, Nathan. I'm not arguing it exactly. I'm just saying that if we're talking about the arguments for it, then yes, I hear all those arguments, but there's counter arguments that we're not getting into. But if it's just for the sake of that's what people believe, this is a thought, totally, then I can add on to this and totally. But I'm saying that it's not final then, just because there's this argument. There's others.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not pro hunting either. And I actually think that we should probably all be, vegetarians.